Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take these monumental, seemingly impossible stories, and we really try to break them down into something you can, grasp and take with you.
Today we are going into, well, one of the greatest intellectual adventures in human history, I think. We're focusing on a figure who achieved something.
Hmm.
It's like the mathematical equivalent of climbing Everest.
Right, but alone, in secret, and without any oxygen. We're talking about Sir Andrew John Wiles.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just going to be a deep dive into the math. It's really a story about dedication, about obsession, and about catastrophic failure, followed by this incredible triumph.
We're unpacking the quest for Fermat's last theorem.
Hmm.
And you have to remember, this was a problem that it mocked the greatest minds for over 3.5 centuries.
Yeah, so our mission here is to move past the headline, man solve old math problem. We want you to really understand the journey.
Exactly. We need to grasp the sheer architectural scale of the framework he had to basically invent. And that means getting into the Taniyama-Shimura Weil conjecture.
Which is now the modularity theorem.
Right. And we need to track that whole journey, the years of sort of monastic isolation, the devastating discovery of a flaw in his proof.
Which we'll definitely get to.
And then the ultimate legacy, which, and this is the key part, it completely redefined modern number theory.
Before we even start, though, we have to talk about Wiles' stature. Because this wasn't some amateur genius having a flash of insight. This was an achievement recognized at the absolute highest levels.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now, he's a Royal Society research professor. And since 2018, he's held the title of the first Regius Professor of Mathematics at Oxford. That's a huge deal.
And the awards.
Yeah.
The Abel Prize in 2016, the Copley Medal in 2017.
And you have to understand, these awards weren't just for solving a puzzle. They were for creating the tools needed to solve it. Tools that then opened up entire new fields of research for other mathematicians.
It's the difference between, say, being a chess grandmaster and being the person who invents a new, vastly more complex and interesting version of chess.
Yep. That's a great way to put it. His work had these profound ripple effects.
So to really understand those ripples, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to the single moment that kind of set the course for his entire life.
Okay, let's get into this origin story, because it honestly sounds like something out of a novel. It all starts with a 10-year-old kid.
That's right. Wiles was born in Cambridge in 1953. His father was a theologian, which is an interesting detail.
Mm-hmm.
The family spent some time in Nigeria, but the real spark, the defining moment, happened back in Cambridge. He talks about walking home from school one day and, just on a whim, stopping by his local public library.
And he pulls a book off the shelf, The Last Problem by Eric Temple Bell. And then this wasn't some dense academic textbook, right? It was a popular science book about math's greatest unsolved mysteries.
Exactly. And in that book, he's introduced to Fermat's last theorem, which is, it's almost unique in mathematics because you can explain it to anyone. A 10-year-old can understand the statement of the problem.
But no one could prove it.
For centuries, no one. So just for anyone who needs a quick refresher, the theorem is pretty simple to state. It says that the equation a to the n plus b to the n equals c to the n has no solutions if you're using positive whole numbers.
Right, for a, b, and c.
And if that exponent, n, is any integer greater than 2.
We all know the case for n equals 2. That's the Pythagorean theorem. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. There are infinite solutions.
Yeah, that's familiar.
But just try it for n equals 3. Or 4 or 5. It doesn't work. And this all comes from Pierre de Fermat in the 17th century, who famously scribbled in the margin of a book that he had a truly marvelous proof.
Which this margin is too narrow to contain.
Yes. The most infamous note in the history of science. It became this dare to the entire world.
And Andrew Wiles, at 10 years old, reads this and just decides.
He decides right there and then, I'm going to be the one to solve this. I mean, the sheer confidence of a child. It's incredible.
But that confidence obviously runs into reality pretty quick.
It does. He realized he didn't have the tools. He didn't know the math. So he says he, abandoned the immediate dream. But that idea, that seed, it was planted. It was just waiting.
So let's talk about how he built the foundation. He goes on this very rigorous academic path, a BA from Merton College, Oxford in 74. Then a PhD from Cambridge in 1980.
And his graduate work is really the key here. He didn't just study general mathematics. He dove straight into the deepest, most technical parts of number theory.
The very parts he would need decades later.
Ironically, yes. He worked under a supervisor named John Coates, and his focus was on the arithmetic of elliptic curves using something called Iwasawa theory.
Okay, that sounds incredibly specialized. Let's break that down for a second. Elliptic curves and Iwasawa theory.
Right. So very basically, Iwasawa theory is about connecting different mathematical worlds. It's a way of understanding these really complex algebraic structures, like number fields, by looking at them through a different lens, the lens of analysis. Think of it like a sophisticated system for organizing what would otherwise be impossibly messy.
So he was learning how to take these really thorny algebra problems and apply these high-level analytical tools to them. He's building a kind of a dictionary between two very different languages.
That's a perfect way to put it. His early work with another mathematician, Barry Mazur, was on the main conjecture of Iwasawa theory. He was establishing himself as a master builder of these conceptual bridges.
And his PhD thesis, just the title, Reciprocity Laws and the Conjecture of Birch and Swinnerton Dyer, tells you everything. That conjecture is another one of these huge foundational problems that connects the algebra of elliptic curves to analytic functions.
So Wiles was fundamentally trained to see the connections between geometry, algebra, and analysis. That was his unique skill set. And he moved around. He was at the Institute for Advanced Study, became a professor at Princeton, a Guggenheim Fellow in Paris. He was right at the center of the number theory world.
Which really highlights a crucial point, doesn't it? For anyone trying to tackle a massive project, Wiles didn't just stumble upon an answer. He spent 20 years mastering the hardest, most niche tools available.
So that when the opportunity finally came, he was ready. He had the perfect toolkit waiting. It's a lesson that you can't solve impossible problems without first building a new foundation.
And that opportunity, as you said, arrived in 1986. And it arrived dramatically.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's make that jump. We have the 17th century dare about whole numbers. How on earth did that suddenly get connected to these incredibly complex modern objects, elliptic curves, and modular forms?
Well, the connection is just a spectacular piece of modern mathematical logic. It's a proof by contradiction, but on a grand scale.
So we have Fermat's last theorem, a to the n plus b to the n equals c to the n. No solutions for n greater than 2. For centuries, people were trying to prove that directly.
Right, using number theory. But the breakthrough came from a completely different direction. It started with a mathematician named Gerhard Frey in the mid-1980s.
And what was Frey's idea?
Frey suggested that if a solution to Fermat's equation actually existed, let's just pretend for a second that it does, say a to the p plus b to the p equals c to the p, you could use those three numbers, a, b, and c, to build a very specific elliptic curve.
A hypothetical curve based on a hypothetical solution.
Exactly. And this curve, now known as the Frey curve, would be, well, it'd be a monster. Mathematically speaking, it would have such strange, irregular properties that it just seemed like it couldn't possibly fit into the known mathematical universe.
This is too weird to exist.
That was the suspicion. Frey conjectured that this curve was so peculiar it couldn't be modular. It couldn't have a modular form associated with it. This was called the epsilon conjecture.
Okay, and this is where Ken Ribbit comes in, and where the light bulb goes off for Wiles in '86.
Yes. Ken Ribbit proved the epsilon conjecture. He showed definitively that if a solution to Fermat's equation existed, the Frey curve it generated would not be modular. This was a bombshell.
So the logic shifted. Now the argument is, if Fermat's last theorem is false, then this weird, non-modular curve must exist.
Precisely. And this is when Weil saw the path. He realized, wait a minute, what if I can prove that all curves of this type must be modular?
Because if he could do that, it would create a paradox.
The perfect contradiction. It would mean the Frey curve couldn't exist, which would mean the solution that generated it couldn't exist, which would mean Fermat's last theorem must be true.
So his goal became proving a part of what was then called the Taniyama-Shimura-Weil conjecture, or TSW.
Which is now, because of this work, known as the modularity theorem.
This theorem is the heart of the whole thing. So let's slow down and really define the two sides of this bridge Wiles had to build. On one side, we have elliptic curves.
Right. These are objects from algebraic geometry defined by cubic equations. They are these, smooth, often very complex shapes, but their algebra is deeply connected to number theory.
And on the other side, modular forms.
Modular forms live in a totally different universe, the world of complex analysis. They are functions that have these incredible, almost supernatural levels of symmetry. They basically stay the same even when you twist and transform them in all sorts of complicated ways.
So one side is algebra and geometry, the other is analysis and symmetry. They seem totally unrelated.
And for most of history, they were. The modularity theorem was this incredibly audacious claim that these two universes were, in fact, one and the same. It said that for every elliptic curve, there's a unique modular form that is its perfect twin, and vice versa. It was like discovering a perfect Rosetta Stone.
And Wiles' challenge was to prove that this Rosetta Stone worked, at least for the specific type of curves that the Frey curve belonged to, the semi-stable elliptic curves.
That's right. The full logical chain was now laid out. 1. Assume Fermat is false.
So a solution exists.
2. That solution creates Frey's peculiar curve. 3. Ribbit proved that curve cannot be modular.
And 4. Wiles just had to prove that it must be modular.
Creating the contradiction. Therefore, the initial assumption must be wrong, and Fermat's last theorem has to be true.
That's just, it's beautiful. It's so elegant. It turns this ancient problem about numbers into this grand mission to unify two huge branches of math. But how hard was this? I mean, you mentioned people thought it was impossible.
The audacity of it cannot be overstated. Wiles' own former supervisor, John Coates, admitted he told students not to work on the conjecture because he considered it completely inaccessible.
Wow.
The consensus was that the tools to prove it simply didn't exist. This was seen as a multi-generational project, something for the 22nd century, not for one person to do.
And yet Wiles knew this was the only way. His specific training, his whole career had led him to this point.
He was one of the few people on Earth who had deep expertise in both sides of the bridge. The elliptic curves and the analytic methods like Iwasawa theory needed to connect them. He saw the path even if everyone else thought it led off a cliff.
The stakes were astronomical.
And the chance of failure was, close to 100%. Knowing all that, Wiles chose to go it alone. He chose total secrecy.
Okay, this brings us to part 3, which is just pure human drama. It's 1986. Wiles decides to take this on, but he does it in complete isolation. Why? Why not work with someone? Or at least tell people what he was doing?
Well, there are a couple of big reasons. First, the commitment was total. This wasn't a weekend project. He devoted basically all of his professional research time to this for 7 straight years.
And the second reason was the pressure.
The pressure, exactly. If the world knew that Andrew Wiles, one of the leading experts in the field, was trying to prove the impossible, the scrutiny would have been unbearable. The media attention, the constant questions, it would have been paralyzing.
By working in secret, he could fail over and over again without anyone knowing. He controlled his own timeline.
He told only his wife. I mean, think about that. You're teaching calculus at Princeton, you're going to faculty meetings, living a normal academic life. And then you go home and secretly try to solve the most famous problem in history. The mental and emotional burden must have been immense.
So how did he keep everyone off his back for 7 years? I mean, academics are expected to publish.
He used a very clever strategy. He had a backlog of previous work, research he had completed before 1986. He started releasing that work in small, segmented papers over the years.
A smokescreen.
A perfect smokescreen. It gave the impression that he was just continuing his normal research program, when in reality he was in his attic, deep in the wilderness, trying to build this mathematical cathedral from scratch.
That's an incredible level of focus. Just knowing that any single unfixable flaw could mean that 7 years of your life were gone.
He talked about it, about trying one approach for a year or two, realizing it was a dead end, and having to just throw it all away and start over. That iterative failure went on for years.
And then comes June of 1993, the moment he decides to reveal it all at a conference in Cambridge.
And he did it with such spectacular understatement. He was scheduled to give a series of 3 lectures. The title was Modular Forms, Elliptic Curves, and Galois Representations.
No mention of Fermat at all.
None. It was billed as a highly technical talk for specialists. But, word started to spread. People in the field knew something big was coming.
Because of his stature and the subject matter.
Right. So the lecture hall got more and more crowded each day. The first day, it was the experts. By the third and final lecture, it was standing room only. People were crammed in the aisles, and he walks them through it. He builds the argument step by step.
And then the final moment. How did he deliver the punchline?
Every account says it was just this quiet, profound moment. He finished laying out the proof of the modularity theorem for semi-stable curves, wrote the conclusion on the blackboard, and then he paused. And then, as the New York Times famously put it, seemingly as an afterthought, he just added that this conclusion meant that Fermat's last theorem was true. And he wrote QED on the board.
Wow. The reaction in that room must have been electric.
Pandemonium, people were crying, there were flashbulbs going off. It was the resolution to a 350-year-old story achieved by one person in secret. It was the ultimate intellectual triumph.
A triumph that lasted for about 2 months.
The euphoria was, yes, catastrophically short-lived. In August of 1993, the proof was going through peer review, as all major proofs do, and a critical flaw was found.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds here. What was the flaw? Was it just a small calculation error?
No, it was much deeper than that. It was foundational. The problem was with the core piece of machinery he was using called an Euler system.
An Euler system.
Right. The flaw was specifically related to something called the Selmer group. In number theory, Selmer groups are tools that, in a way, measure how hard it is to find solutions on an elliptic curve. Wiles needed to prove that a particular Selmer group was small enough for his argument to work.
Okay, so the Selmer group is like a critical support beam in his proof.
A perfect analogy. And the Euler system was the high-tech crane he was using to put that beam in place and prove it was strong enough.
And the crane broke.
The crane had a hidden defect. The specific method he was using, an adaptation of something called the Cully-Vaughan-Flack method, it didn't work in the exact context he needed it to. The machinery wasn't reliable.
So the triumph just evaporates. He goes from being the hero of mathematics to the person who has to fix the most famous mistake in the world under a global microscope.
It was devastating. He spent the next year, more than a year, trying to fix the original argument. He brought in his former student, Richard Taylor, to help him, but every attempt to patch the hole failed. The original path was completely blocked.
You have to imagine the psychological state he was in. He's on record saying he was on the verge of giving up, of admitting defeat.
He was in despair. He had exhausted every possible fix, and then comes the breakthrough, the real moment of genius. It was September 19th, 1994.
What happened?
He was at his desk, just about to give up, looking over his failed attempts one last time. And he had this sudden realization. The solution wasn't to fix the broken machinery. The solution was that the reason the machinery failed was itself the key to a completely different approach.
Wait, say that again?
The error in the Euler system, the very thing that broke his proof, could be precisely controlled by a different technique. A technique from his own past. Iwasawa theory.
The very first thing he specialized in, 20 years earlier.
The foundation he built in his PhD was the one thing that could save him. He realized that the flaw wasn't just a flaw, it was a signpost pointing to a new path. He didn't have to fix the bridge, he could use his old tools to build a new, stronger one right next to it.
That is the ultimate aha moment, the kind of thing you see in movies.
It was the final piece of the puzzle. He quickly worked out the details, brought Taylor back in to help formalize one part, and in May of 1995, they published 2 papers in the Annals of Mathematics. One by Wiles and a shorter joint paper with Taylor that nailed down the technical fix.
And that was it. The 350-year quest was, for real this time, over. So the story of the proof itself is just this incredible drama. But as we move into part 4, the real legacy, the real weight of what Wiles did isn't just solving that one equation. It's the mathematical world he left behind.
Absolutely. The analogy I like is that everyone remembers the Eiffel Tower, but the real legacy was the invention of structural steel and the methods used to build it. Wiles invented new tools that mathematicians immediately started using everywhere.
And how quickly did people start picking up on these new methods?
Instantly. The techniques he developed, especially around something called the deformation theory of Galois representations, were just fundamental. They provided the blueprint for his former student, Richard Taylor, and 3 other mathematicians.
Ryan Conrad, Fred Diamond, and Christoph Briel.
Right. They took Wiles's platform and used it to finish the job.
And the job was proving the full modularity theorem for all elliptic curves.
Exactly. Wiles had only proven the semi-stable case, which was all he needed for Fermat. By the year 2000, thanks to his methods, the entire Taniyama-Shimura-Weil conjecture was no longer a conjecture. It was a proven foundational theorem of mathematics.
Which is this massive act of unification. And this, you've said, points to his even bigger legacy, his contribution to something called the Langlands Program.
Yes. Okay, so we need to spend some time on this because the Langlands Program is, without exaggeration, probably the most ambitious and far-reaching vision in all of modern mathematics.
If the modularity theorem was one giant bridge between 2 mathematical continents, the Langlands Program is trying to build a transportation network connecting every continent.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. It was proposed by Robert Langlands in the 1960s, and it's this vast web of conjectures, this grand roadmap that seeks to unify number theory, algebraic geometry, and another field called harmonic analysis.
And what's the core idea? Why is this unification so important?
The idea is to establish a kind of deep correspondence, a reciprocity between objects from these different fields, Specifically, it tries to link objects from number theory, called Galois representations, with objects from analysis called automorphic forms.
Which are basically a generalization of modular forms.
Exactly. And if these links are real, it means you can take a hard problem in one field, translate it into the language of another field, and potentially solve it there much more easily. It's the ultimate mathematical translation dictionary.
And Wiles's work provided a new way to actually build parts of that dictionary.
It did more than that. When he got the Abel Prize in 2016, he said that his methods opened up a new way of attacking the Langlands Program.
And what was that new way? What was the specific tool?
It goes back to how he fixed the flaw. It was his work on the deformation theory of Galois representations. He showed how you could take one of these representations, bend it or deform it just slightly, and use that to prove it was modular. This became a powerful general-purpose technique for proving instances of the Langlands correspondence.
So he didn't just solve an old problem. He created a new piece of technology that allowed future mathematicians to start building the grand, unified theory.
He provided the first major concrete success story for that architecture. He proved that this grand vision wasn't just a fantasy, it was achievable. And that spurred a tidal wave of new research.
And this professional success also created a kind of intellectual dynasty, right?
Yeah.
His students have gone on to do incredible things.
He has an incredible academic tree. You have Richard Taylor, of course, who helped with the proof and became a world leader in his own right. But you also have people like Manjul Bhargava, who won the Fields Medal in 2014.
The highest prize in math.
The highest prize. And another student, Carl Rubin, who is a giant in algebraic number theory. Wiles wasn't just working alone, he was training the next generation who would build on his foundations.
Which explains the incredible wave of honors that came after 1995. The community knew instantly how big this was.
It was a flood of awards. In the first few years, he got the Schock Prize, the Ostrovsky Prize, the Fermat Prize, the Wolf Prize, just one after another.
But the most interesting story is about the Fields Medal, isn't it? The one he didn't get.
Right. So the Fields Medal, as you said, is like the Nobel for math, but it has a strict age limit of 40. When Wiles published the final correct proof, he was 42.
He solved the problem of the millennium, but he missed the age cutoff by 2 years.
So the International Mathematical Union, the IMU, had a problem. They couldn't just ignore the biggest achievement in a century because of a rule. So in 1998, they did something unprecedented. They created a special one-time award just for him, the IMU Silver Plaque.
They literally bent their own rules to honor him.
Which tells you everything you need to know about the magnitude of the work. And the honors just kept coming over the decades. A knighthood in 2000, the Shaw Prize, and finally the Abel Prize in 2016, which has no age limit and is on par with a Nobel.
And there's even a permanent physical honor at Oxford.
There is. In 2013, the new building for the Mathematical Institute at Oxford was named the Wiles Building. To have a major academic building named after you while you're still alive and working there, that's a rare honor indeed.
So we've tracked this journey. From a 10-year-old with a library book to the man who stared into a catastrophic flaw in his life's work and found a way to turn it into the foundation for a unified mathematical future. #outro.
So to just summarize this incredible journey for you, Andrew Wiles didn't solve Fermat's last theorem by attacking it head-on. He did it by first mastering these incredibly deep, separate fields, Iwasawa theory, elliptic curves, modular forms, and then weaving them together with the modularity theorem as his grand unifying bridge.
He took the huge personal risk of working in total secrecy for 7 years. He survived the public collapse of his first proof because of that flaw in the Euler system.
And then he found redemption by going back to his very first area of expertise, to Iwasawa theory, to build a completely new path around the obstacle.
And the result wasn't just a proof of Fermat. It was the foundation for the full modularity theorem. It was a set of brand new tools that gave mathematicians a real, concrete way to start tackling the grand vision of the Langlands program.
At the end of the day, his success was about synthesis. It wasn't about brute force. It was about finding this unexpected, profound connection between two mathematical worlds that everyone thought were strangers. He forced algebraic geometry and harmonic analysis to speak the same language.
And this really is the essential takeaway, isn't it? For anyone listening, no matter what your field is, the solution to your hardest problems might not lie inside that field. It might be waiting at the intersection of two things you never thought to connect.
Exactly. And that's the powerful question for you to think about, whether you're in science or business or art. If Wiles's breakthrough came from forcing a link between disparate worlds to make progress on this huge unifying program, What seemingly impossible problem in your own life could be unlocked by forcing a connection between two disciplines or two skills that no one has ever put together before?
What if unsolvable is just another word for not yet connected? The next big breakthrough you have might just be sitting there at the junction of two things you already know.
If you want to go deeper into the human story behind all this, which is just as fascinating as the math, there are two fantastic resources. The BBC documentary, which aired in the US on Nova as The Proof.
A brilliant documentary. And the book by Simon Singh, Fermat's Last Theorem. It tells the story beautifully and accessibly. We highly recommend both.
And that's it for this deep dive into a 350-year quest and the quiet, persistent dedication it took to finally end it.
We'll see you next time.
Welcome to The Debate.
Today we're looking at the career of Sir Andrew Wiles, the British mathematician whose name is, well, it's pretty much synonymous with one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the modern era, the proof of Fermat's last theorem.
Right, or FLT, an achievement that required him to prove the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture for a critical class of equations, and, in doing so, brought this decisive closure to a mathematical riddle that had stumped the best minds for over 300 years.
So our central question today is really about his enduring legacy. Is it that monumental, singular historical achievement of proving FLT itself? That moment of final, conclusive victory?
Or is it the foundational, unifying mathematical methods he developed along the way, the new tools and frameworks that really pushed number theory forward and, paved the way for the broader Langlands program?
And I think the proof of FLT was spectacularly important, of course, but I'll be arguing that Wiles's creation of these robust new mathematical frameworks and the deep structural unification that followed, that's what holds the greater long-term significance.
And I'll hold that the historical completion of Fermat's last theorem is the defining permanent aspect of his career. For me, the proof of FLT absolutely must be Wiles's defining legacy. And that's precisely because of the sheer historical weight and the difficulty of that specific problem. I mean, this was a personal challenge for him, right? It goes all the way back to when he was 10 years old and he found a copy of The Last Problem. It was a theorem, as he said, so easy to state that he, a 10-year-old, could understand it, yet it had resisted proof for centuries. He dedicated himself to this one goal with just this exceptional discipline, famously working in near total secrecy for over 6 years, starting around mid-1986.
Right.
And the audacity of it is key. His peers, people like his former supervisor, John Coates, they saw the necessary prerequisite, the modularity theorem, as, and this is a quote, impossible to actually prove. Ken Ribbitt called it completely inaccessible. Wiles succeeded where centuries of mathematical titans had failed, and this led to immediate widespread public acclaim and unique honors tied specifically to this one achievement, like the Wolfsco Prize in 1997 and the IMU Silver Plaque in 98, which was granted specifically because he was over the age limit for the Fields Medal. This whole context just elevates the achievement from a technical step to a defining historical monument.
I see that, but I come at it from a different angle. The solution to FLT was, in my view, merely a spectacular consequence, the lightning strike, if you will, of the deeper, more profound mathematical tools Wiles was developing. His work was already deeply rooted in the structural side of number theory long before he turned his full attention to FLT. I mean, his true expertise lay in unifying these disparate fields, Galois representations, elliptic curves, and modular forms.
Okay.
This complex framework, it really began with his work on Iwasawa theory in the late 70s, where he was already proving the main conjecture for certain extensions of totally real fields. And for anyone who's not familiar, the Langlands program is essentially a kind of grand unification theory for mathematics. It predicts these deep, hidden connections between fields that seem totally separate. And Wiles's breakthrough was establishing a key part of that vision, the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture. To say his goal was merely FLT, I think undervalues his entire career trajectory toward this idea of mathematical unification. And crucially, Wiles himself said as much. When he got the Abel Prize in 2016, he stated very clearly that he didn't just prove FLT, but he pushed the whole of mathematics as a field towards the Langlands program. And you see the power of his methods in what happened next. His students, Taylor, Conrad, Diamond, Breuil, they went on to prove the full modularity theorem by 2000, building directly on his work. That kind of expansion, that speaks to a foundational legacy, not just a conclusive one.
I see why you think that, and I definitely concede the immense conceptual importance of the Langlands program, but let's look at the driving force from a different perspective. It was the specific challenge of FLT, that equation that fascinated him as a child, that provided the critical motivation to actually create the tools. I mean, if the goal had just been some generalized theory, would the methods have been pushed to such absolute limits? Would they have been subjected to that sustained, almost impossible intellectual pressure? I don't think so.
But is that a meaningful distinction, the target versus the method?
I think it is. The legacy is tied to the successful conclusion of that 300-year quest. The fame, the historical context, that's what defines it. This very specific, hard-won victory led directly to honors that cemented his public identity, with the problem, being appointed a Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the naming of the Mathematical Institute building at Oxford after him. The public and academic communities recognize that moment of historical closure, not the abstract program it supports.
That argument rests on a separation I don't really accept, the separation between the target and the methodological innovation. I mean, the sources show Wiles was already a respected expert generalizing Iwasawa theory, working with these sophisticated objects like representations attached to Hilbert modular forms well before 1986. His application of these complex structural concepts to the Taniyama-Shimura conjecture, that is the true innovation.
But that link was only made because of FLT.
Exactly, but let's be precise about that link. The modularity conjecture says every elliptic curve can be associated with a modular form. Wiles was only brought into the FLT discussion because of the work of Gerhard Frey and then Ken Ribet. Ribet proved that if a counterexample to Fermat's last theorem existed, you could construct this very peculiar elliptic curve, the Frey curve, with such strange properties that it could not be modular. So Wiles's task wasn't to prove FLT directly. It was to prove that the Taniyama-Tamura conjecture held for this class of semi-stable elliptic curves. Proving that connection is a far more fundamental statement about the deep structure of mathematics than the theorem itself. FLT was the target that allowed the theoretical weaponry to be deployed, yes, but the invention of the weapon is the lasting contribution.
Okay, I see that connection, but I still believe the goal dictated the rigor required. And to delve deeper into that, let's talk about the period of the flaw and the fix. I think the necessity of overcoming that flaw is what fundamentally shows that the singular historical goal of FLT pushed Wiles to an intellectual resolution that just pursuing a generalized theory might not have demanded.
I agree that period is central, but I see it as the strongest evidence for the lasting methodological contribution. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the final proof prioritizes the FLT goal over the creation of new methods. When that flaw was discovered in August 93, related to the Selmer group and Euler systems, he had to stop the celebration and completely rethink his approach.
Right, a huge setback.
A huge one. And the Selmer group is this key object for studying rational points on an elliptic curve. It was crucial for his initial approach. When that failed, he and Richard Taylor were forced to synthesize and build genuinely new methods, combining ideas from Kolavagin and Flatch's approach with Iwasawa theory. This process, building robust new methods over the course of a year to overcome a profound hurdle, that is the actual lasting technical contribution. It wasn't just applying existing theory, it was profound theoretical invention under extreme duress.
That's an interesting point on the synthesis, though. I would frame that period very differently. The immense intellectual focus he maintained on this single problem for nearly a decade, even through the public humiliation and the intellectual agony of that flaw, it demonstrates that the goal was dictating the methodology. Think about the pressure he was under after announcing a result that turned out to be incomplete. The ultimate fix wasn't some philosophical detour toward a broader program. It was an immediate, decisive solution required to secure the FLT proof.
But it was a new method.
It was. The insight he had on September 19, 1994, which connected his methods to what we call horizontal Iwasawa theory, was the final critical piece. but it was driven by the urgent need to conclude the proof of Fermat's equation. The drive for FLT wasn't secondary, it was the pressure vessel that ensured the methods were rigorously tested and pushed to their absolute limits. If the end goal had been less ambitious or less historically charged, the framework might never have achieved the robustness it needed to survive that level of scrutiny.
While I do concede the historical magnetism of that pursuit, the question remains, what holds greater value for mathematics? A conclusive historical moment, or a system that allows for exponential future growth? The goal of proving LFT was finite. The utility of the framework Wiles created is, well, it's effectively infinite. Wiles' own approach meant he wasn't looking for some numerical trick specific to Fermat's equation, which is what so many others had tried. He was creating a unified system, and that system, once it was complete, it immediately became foundational. I mean, just look again at the proof of the full modularity theorem. Wiles only needed the semi-stable case for FLT, but the fact that his framework was so scalable and so comprehensive that it allowed others to prove the general case, that shows that the output of his method was structurally superior to the initial input goal. His work provides the enduring structure for future exploration. It confirms his own statement that he pushed the field toward Langlands. That structure is what's going to dictate research trajectories 50 or 100 years from now, long after the singular event of the FLT proof is just absorbed into textbook history.
But defining a legacy based solely on technical utility risks ignoring the human element, the inspiration, the galvanizing effect of a historical victory. The focus on this 300-year-old problem, it galvanized public and academic interest in number theory in a way that generalized theorems frankly rarely do. The media attention, the documentaries, the popular books, that is all a legacy derived from the singular historical victory. Wiles's name will forever be associated with solving one of the most famous problems in history. That clarity, that singular victory, is a more powerful and defining legacy than a potentially endless program of unification, which is, by its very definition, incomplete and ongoing. The legacy of Wiles is that he's the man who finished the quest.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. Defining a legacy based on public acclaim, I think, risks undervaluing the true mathematical depth. While the publicity was great for the field, the true measure of Wiles's career is the system he left behind. His contribution was creating this powerful conceptual bridge, a systematic way to move between algebraic geometry and representation theory. This unification, the foundational framework that supports the Langlands program, is far more significant than the solution to one specific Diophantine equation, however famous it might be. The framework is generative, it's dynamic, it's applicable across vast parts of modern math. The FLT proof is conclusive and, in a way, static. The structure he built ensures his work will continue to influence breakthroughs long after the historical fanfare has faded.
Well, while acknowledging the brilliance and, yes, the generative power of the techniques Wiles developed and the conceptual bridges he built, the sheer magnitude of the problem he set out to solve, a challenge that defeated centuries of brilliant mathematicians, that for me remains the pinnacle of his achievement. The proof of Fermat's last theorem is the defining historical monument of his career. It provided unique closure to a question that had defined mathematical frustration for generations.
And I maintain that the intellectual bravery lay not just in tackling FLT, but in developing the complex machinery required to bridge those distinct fields, Galois representations, elliptic curves, modular forms, and in doing so, fundamentally advancing the Langlands program. This systematic approach, confirmed by the ongoing success of his methods, offers a legacy that is fundamentally generative rather than merely conclusive.
It's clear we agree on the tremendous importance of his career. His work really stands as a testament to how the relentless pursuit of a specific, deeply held, historical problem can drive the most profound and general theoretical advances. It leaves us to weigh whether the goal or the sophisticated tools created to reach it represents the greater and most enduring contribution.